We have, I think, give or take 5,500 at this point. We've heard from people like, I could not find an answer to this question for weeks, having done research, leveraged like commercially paid research license, like all of that stuff. And then within, in some cases, minutes or less than a day, folks will get an answer, like an exact answer to their question. They can move on and apply that at work. A really big part of the value prop now is around networking and being able to help people discover other members they may want to talk to, or like in some cases randomly pair them. What's really been surprising to me is you have to just continue being like incessantly annoying about things because people miss things. One of the biggest learnings for me is like people need constant reminders. It's never been like growth for growth's sake. It's really just been like, if the right people get into the community and have a good experience, they're going to invite more good people to the community. Slack is where people engage and want to be, and there's just nothing that even comes close to the level of just like adoption and native usage of the platform. They're just not. And trust me, I've dug very, very, very deep to understand like what are some possible solutions to that, and it's just, it does make sense. I don't see a future where like we're not on Slack, honestly. One of our core operating principles that isn't necessarily stated is like to just always be getting the feedback, and to not just get the feedback, but actually do something about it. One challenge for us is everyone in our community engages very differently. So some folks are super active in Slack, other folks are more like based in email.
Welcome to Beginner Maps, where we interview operators of top community businesses so that you can replicate the best of what these community builders have already figured out. Today, I am thrilled to have Abbey from Health Tech Nerds with us. Health Tech Nerds is one of the largest memberships, not just in the health industry, but I believe in the tech industry in general as well. So at the time of recording, they have more than 5,000 members in their membership, and even more who are subscribed to their newsletters. Members get access to paid newsletter editions, a Slack community, and a lot more perks of joining the membership, which Abby will be telling us more about on this episode. And Abby is the person who is responsible for managing this community. She handles engagement, operations, growth, partnerships, and so much more here. So if you've got a newsletter and are thinking about starting a community, or if you already got one, Abby is the person you should probably listen to. So thank you so much for joining us here, Abby. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Thanks, Atesh. Happy to be here.
Amazing. So, Abby, how would you just describe the people who join Health Tech Nerds? Yeah.
Yeah, I would say the folks who join Health Tech Nerds are a group of highly engaged individuals who are looking to make a difference in the healthcare space. I think that's true across all of our members. I would say, given it's, a paid community, it's a group of people who are like self-selecting to, in most cases, paying for the membership out of pocket to get access to a community, to grow their network, help exchange knowledge around folks who are just willing to kind of spend time like outside of work, or in some cases during work, to just get to know the industry better, get to know the folks in the industry better, and just get access to kind of the next layer of resources that may otherwise not be out there.
Yeah, I love this. And did I get the number right? Like you have more than 5,000 members in the community, right?
Yeah, we have, I think, give or take 5,500 at this point, and that number is always changing, right?
Yeah.
As we know, there's always churn, but there's always growth, and you figure it out. So yeah, I would say just over 5,500.
Yeah, and then like, can you share like how many people are in the newsletter, like subscribers to the newsletter?
Yeah, we have, I want to say 23,000 the last time I checked. So yeah, it's about 20-ish%, 20 to 25% at any given time of folks who are part of the HCN community, who are part of our audience.
That's amazing. Like, so that is like, so 23,000, just to be clear, is that includes both the free and the paid members. And then you have like a 20-25% essentially conversion, right?
Yeah, so the 5,500 is included in that 23,000.
Yeah, that is amazing. Like that is a phenomenal percentage of, conversion from free to paid. Yeah, just on its own, I want to just state that. Okay, now tell me more about the newsletter and the community side of things and the origin of this. So if
Yeah.
I'm not wrong, Health Tech Nerds started as a newsletter that was run by Kevin O'Leary, who's is he the writer, the founder of the newsletter?
Yeah. Yep.
Perfect. Okay. And then why did he decide to add community to the mix? You must have any idea about that? Okay.
Yeah, definitely. I wasn't a part of HTN at that time, but from what I've learned over the course of the past couple of years is that Kevin started writing the newsletter, I want to say 8 or so years ago at this point. And over time, folks just wanted sort of a space to connect with other readers who were reading and reacting and responding to the newsletter, and just kind of an opportunity and a space to connect with like-minded people. If you're reading the newsletter every single Sunday, chances are you're sort of already in this next like echelon, if you will, of folks who are deeply invested in keeping up with the industry outside of their like specific scope of work, and really care about staying in touch with kind of the movements and the headwinds and the things that are happening in the space. And so I think, it really was born out of the idea of like how can we create like an asynchronous and synchronous space for people to connect, and both with Kevin and kind of discuss the things that he's sharing, as well as with one another, to help sort of start that knowledge exchange idea and help us connect.
Yeah, that is amazing. And so essentially, it started as a newsletter. The newsletter was really popular, and folks wanted to meet other folks, not just Kevin. They want to connect with each other, and that put the community.
Exactly.
Love this. Now this is incredible. I just think there's such a great business model and such a great like value add in general for anybody who's like a consumer of all of these newsletters like Substacks and all of those things. So I'm gonna spend like some time to let's do a mini masterclass on how to build a membership of not just there are a lot of people who have like paid newsletter like they're gatekeeping or paywalling some of the editions of the newsletter, but then there's so much more that you can offer by turning that newsletter into a membership and a community. So I'm gonna spend some time asking you about how you're doing that so that other people can also take some inspiration from that and probably start their own memberships. So
Sure.
on this note, the first question. So we have been conversing over email for the past couple of months, and there are two things that have really inspired me. The first of those is that you have an incredible attention to detail. Like you have at this point, you probably know more about our product than we do, like the ins and outs of it. And that is just amazing to me, considering how many things you are handling at one point. And the second point is how well connected you are with your members. Like every time you're very quick to collect feedback, and if you have like any interesting feedback, then you're also quick to you have a pulse with your members, so members reply to you and you have this going on. So I think this is a really important and understated aspect of running a community. I feel both of these things. So yeah, just with respect to these, tell me, what's your operating principle when it comes to community management?
It's a good question. One of our core operating principles that isn't necessarily stated is like to just always be getting feedback, and to not just get the feedback, but actually do something about it. And I think that's across the board in terms of just like product by product, which in this case, like working with Curated Connections, being like very focused on understanding what people are saying and hoping to improve any like less than stellar experiences. But I think it's like also more broadly applicable across the entire product set, because an experience as a member is not just like in one specific product, but if they have a negative experience out like with a different product set, it's gonna like kind of taint like their entire member experience. And so I think one, just kind of being open and making it very clear that we're receptive to feedback all over the place, so across the user journey, in multiple places across the product set, so within Slack, across products, in our emails, things like that. And so just getting folks really comfortable with the idea that like we're always available across a number of different channels, if you will, so people don't feel afraid to share the feedback, but they also know that like we're actually going to do something with the feedback. And folks really appreciate that. I think the ability to, I would say more often than not, folks have really positive experiences, but with a community of the size of ours, you're always going to get a couple nuanced experiences. And I think being able to identify and reach out to those folks to show them like, we recognize this, we care about this, we want to do something about it, I think is really, really important. So I'd say just creating sort of that expectation that feedback is always welcome and that we are doing things about it is a really big one. I I don't necessarily think we're excellent at that. I think we always have room to grow. We have a lot of folks sharing really good ideas, and I think capacities are always our biggest constraint. And so being able to kind of carve out time on a regular basis to say, like, here are the patterns that we're recognizing, and here's where we need to invest in the business, I think is really important. It's super easy to get wrapped up in the sense of like, someone having a negative experience and letting that kind of not tear you down necessarily, but it's certainly discouraging. And I think on the flip side of that, we have a channel within our team that's like wins and testimonials. And so in addition to sharing like the constructive feedback we get from our members, when we do get like the wins and the appreciation from members, we also share that. And so I think that's a really healthy habit to build in this type of a business where like you have thousands of data points coming at you like weekly, monthly, and being able to recognize where you have areas to improve, but also recognize like where you're having traction and folks are having positive experiences is really important. And in terms of just like the ability to have that attention to detail, I don't know if I have any specific advice on that. I've sort of always been that way. I think since joining the team at Health Tech Nerds, I've had to not necessarily dial that back, but find like better ways to manage that about myself. And so being able to prioritize, like in the case of Curated Connections, like when we initially launched, like really carving out time in my week, in my couple of weeks after launch, to keep an eye on the inbox, be able to respond readily for folks, especially because it's a single opt-in. So like once they're in and they're getting the emails, like you're relatively set. But I think being very attentive to folks during that time was really, really important, and being able to like modify your communications and like reach out to people, I think was a huge key to success in the rollout of the platform.
First thing, like you mentioned that since members are joining the community, they are naturally inclined to share feedback. And I don't know, I would like to like just lightly push back on that, because I've been a part of, and I've also managed so many communities where members are not like sharing feedback. And I think it's like easy to get into this vicious cycle where either you're not asking members for feedback, or like somebody shares a feedback and then nothing happens, so they're like discouraged. And there's this, it has something to do with the environment that you create, like members feeling like they want to share feedback and improve this space. So
I think that's good to hear. I mean, it's encouraging for sure, validating. But yeah, I think, I don't know, there's putting out like an open ask for feedback is always tricky, because there's always the risk of like, well, if we're going to put out the ask for feedback, what are we actually going to do about it when people share it? And like, is it actually going to change the outcome of a decision that we make? And in some cases, maybe not. But I think it's a really good signal to members to say, hey, like, if you ever do have feedback, please share it with us. And continuing to make that like a regular practice, I think is helpful. And so like anytime I post like on our general channel, or I'll post, we'll launch a product or anything like that, I'm always saying, by the way, if you have feedback to share, just reach out to us. And I think a big part of that is having a very clear and active presence in the community directly, so folks know you're there, know you're active, know you're responsive, things like that.
Yeah, so I'm gonna pull on that thread a little bit more about collecting feedback. So, at what points of the member journey do you focus on collecting feedback, or are you actively looking on collecting feedback? So, for example, like one of those is, when you're rolling out a new product like Curate Connections, like at that point, you're really, looking for feedback. What else?
So we have, like I said, just kind of literally planting the seed in every single product always is one. The second being, we have, when new folks join, we have a drip campaign that goes on. And after a couple of weeks, if we do notice that they're engaging, we send out an NPS question. And if they answer anything lower than a 10, we always ask what we can do to improve. And if they answer something quite low, we of course like do what we can to reach out to them and try to get the feedback and try to change that for them. And so it's kind of that like first couple of weeks, you've had the chance to experience the community, you've gone through the onboarding, things like that, and get that initial response. And then I think like from there, it's really just a matter of, I think the one challenge for us is everyone in our community engages very differently. So some folks are super active in Slack, other folks are more like based in email. They maybe don't have time for Slack, they're maybe not a native Slack user. And so after kind of that initial couple of weeks, it's really important for us to do it like based on like product by product. And just really meeting folks where they are and always kind of keeping that door open for folks. And it's very like we're very accessible. Kevin's very accessible. I'm very accessible.
I love this. And I'm also curious, like, do you have a process for managing all of this feedback? Because you have thousands of community members, and that means like you must be getting bombarded with just feedback coming from everything place. So do you do anything to keep track of like the feedbacks that you've resolved, the ones that are in progress, or any sort of a system for that?
I wish I could say yes to that question. I think I've just over time gotten into the habit of checking every single week, and if I recognize anomalies that need to be addressed, I do something about that. I think I would say we're very responsive in the sense that like if we start to see something building up for like product feedback, things like that, we move rather quickly to make changes. I think one of the biggest challenges in our community specifically is that even though it is healthcare, health tech focused, it's like healthcare is such a crazy industry where like there's a million and one like patient populations and like conditions to focus on. And then so that would be like the industry types and sectors, and then you have like the verticals of that, which are like the technical, the clinical. And so you're sort of serving this audience that, like I said, is very industry specific, but we have all different types of people from all different stages in their career working on many different things that have many different needs. And I think that is the hardest part for us because like people have a lot of really good ideas. And I'm always like, yeah, that would be super cool. The reality is maybe it's cool for 4 or 5 people. And so I think finding that like sweet spot of at what point does it make sense to invest in a product or write the content piece or whatever that might be, I think is the hardest thing for us. And I think just over time, as we test various things and topics, again, that feedback helps either validate or invalidate an idea for us. And so to answer your question, we don't have like a super great process around that, but it's moving in as near real time as possible to action on those things. And even if we're not saying like, yes, we're going to go write that content, we're at least saying like, we'll share that within our team and we'll put it on the, like we'll kind of collect it and whatnot. And I think even that goes a really long way for people, just like the ability to share the feedback directly, but also the fact that we are listening to them. And also like challenging folks' ideas. I think people really appreciate understanding like, oh, I guess you're right that, you know, maybe something like this could be more helpful. And I think people just appreciate being heard, even if it doesn't mean that we're gonna like write the content piece tomorrow.
This is amazing. Yeah, I think the key takeaway for me is just like being really responsive. I mean, you're responsive to the extent where whenever something comes up, you're like on top of it and taking care of it, like stacking. So that is, I guess, the best way to take care of feedback. Like you don't need a process to manage it if you're just doing it like as it comes. So that's great to hear.
Definitely. And I think just like understanding the business model and understanding your customers deeply to start with is a major part of that as well. And so knowing kind of where they're coming from and the problems that they're already facing gives you really helpful context to help. And that is, I think, a huge part of it as well.
I agree. I love this. So let's take a little segue and talk about what is happening inside the Slack or in the community. So, what are some of the key pillars of the community experience, or maybe like what are some things that members get the most value out of?
Yeah, it's a good question. I would say as our community has grown, I think the networking use case has become pretty prominent. Initially, it was a little bit more of like a private, intimate community where kind of folks knew everyone in the community and they were comfortable posting publicly all the time. I think increasingly, as more and more people join, I think the issue of or the challenge of discoverability becomes more and more apparent, obviously, as volume increases, folks need help kind of navigating that. And as we've grown, like the more perspectives and the more types of people, like from different walks of healthcare, have joined the community. And I think as we've grown, the diversity of perspectives and things like that has also strengthened. And so I think a really big part of the value prop now is around networking and being able to help people discover other members they may want to talk to, or like in some cases randomly pair them, and there's like some serendipity to that. And so I think networking is really, really big one. Learning has also been a major core of that. I think we're sort of working on in the background and doubling down on some of those products. We've hit pause just to kind of recollect all of the feedback and figure out how we move forward with those things. And so I would say the core value prop in the like on the learning side of things is really around like the knowledge exchange that happens in the community. And so as an example, we have a couple channels that are like ask oriented. And so we have one that's builders ask, which is basically folks who are building companies or like solving a problem can post a question in the channel, and folks can weigh in on kind of what they've experienced, what they know about a problem, and things like that. And like a lot of times we've heard from people like, I could not find an answer to this question for weeks, having done research, leveraged like commercially paid research license, like all of that stuff. And then within, in some cases, minutes or less than a day, folks will get an answer, like an exact answer to their question. They can move on and apply that at work. And I think that is outsized value for essentially what the membership investment costs for folks. And so I think the ability to just tap into the broader collective wisdom of the community is really great. And I think similar to my point earlier about the growth, we've had to make it a little bit easier to highlight some of those learnings. And so we do sort of an aggregation, if you will, every week where we highlight like 5 or 6 of the top conversations that are happening where folks are helping one another, and we just summarize what that conversation looks like. We send that out over email, and it's a way of just kind of like, if folks aren't in Slack all day every day and might miss something, it's a way for them to like have that in their inbox and have that accessible and whatnot. So I think from a learning perspective now, as we speak, I think the knowledge exchange is the biggest value add there. And then obviously as we continue to produce content and invest in learning, that continues to grow. But I think the same challenge still remains for us, which is like, what are the topics we're going to host events on, and how can we make it applicable and relevant but not too generic? And then a lot of folks join our community for career reasons. So looking for a new job, making a career transition, wanting to just like grow their network for career purposes. And it's a lot of how the word of mouth spreads for folks. And we have a super active jobs channel. I want to say we have like hundreds of jobs posted every month. In some cases, they haven't even been posted publicly outside of the community. And so it gives our members sort of an opportunity to, in most cases, connect directly with the person at the company who may or may not be the hiring manager. And I also think it serves as like another way for folks to understand how you may be like sort of a proxy to how a candidate may be in the market. And so, maybe you see someone who's like contributing regularly to the community and appears as a thought leader. It's another good way to not necessarily brand build, but like build rapport and kind of help like contribute to the community. And that's a good way for employers to say this person looks like they know what they're talking about. They're willing to help other people. They show up in a positive and productive way. And I think the same is actually true about companies. And so people will share news. They'll be having conversations about funding rounds and getting like, for me, prior to being on the HCN team, when I was looking for roles, if I heard about a company, the first thing that I would do is I would go to HCN. I would keyword search the company and see like, are people talking about this company? Yes or no? If they are, what are they saying? And also like that may surface people that are actually working there. And so it was an interesting way for me to like get another market signal on a company that is, I would say, like truly like honest and candid versus like a PR release I might find online or content published by that company. I think it's like underneath all the reasons people join HCN. And so it's really important for us to continue investing in making that easier for people, which in part is helping to put it on autopilot, as well as helping figure out who's in the community and how can I get in touch with them.
I love this. This is such a, I feel like a core part and sort of like the missing piece of puzzle when you consider like newsletter versus a community, because newsletter is, where it's like the writer talking to the subscribers and it's like you're consuming information. Then the missing piece of it is, you're connected to the writer, but you now want to be connected with other readers, and that is the networking piece of it that you're saying is so important for your community members' experience as well.
Definitely.
Yeah. And yeah, tell me more about like what, like you mentioned workshops. So you're hosting like workshops, live workshops in the community as well.
Yeah, I left so recently where, like I said, kind of trying to take a step back and figure out, what is the product set for that moving forward. Again, like this is the challenge that we face every day, which is like, how do you, I'm trying to think of an example of something in this space. Like, what is something that is, relevant enough to folks, but where you can get, hundreds of members benefiting from this versus like maybe 20 to 30 show up. So that's kind of where we're trying to invest in both like team and product. So really just understanding like I'm getting feedback from members to say like what are the things you're wanting to learn and like the market doesn't currently offer in terms of like I'd seen Lenny's community do like a building AI workshop. Like AI is a super hot topic in healthcare right now, and I think it will continue to be, especially lately. And so, like, what is something that we could put on for folks that is, again, broadly applicable, but not so like high level that, they get bored and walk away and don't actually take anything away from that. And so, having conversations like, I think this is maybe a separate point, but like having conversations with community members who may actually be able to play that role in hosting those workshops and bringing them on and investing in them as well to be, part of the team and helping facilitate those types of events. And so we're still kind of reflecting and strategizing on like the workshop virtual learning event front, but ultimately just comes down to like, what is the topic and how deep do we go? And then finding someone who is really strong facilitator and being able to kind of like continue that cycle.
I like this. And yeah, it feels like the HTN Slack and the community is sort of like a private LinkedIn for folks in the healthcare space, because you're able to do all sorts of like cool things, like help members get jobs, and you're able to get like market feedback, do some research, all these cool things. And yeah, this is so cool.
Yeah, I would say it was never the vision for the community to become like the LinkedIn for healthcare. We've used that internally a few times, like, and their only reason is like, I think we want to differentiate in that case and making people feel like they have sort of this, I don't want to say like first degree connection with one another, but there's this like slightly warmer of an
Yeah.
intro when you're all within the same community. And so I think it gives people the benefit of that as well.
Absolutely. I love this. And talking about networking, you also just started using Curated Connections. And now I don't want to turn this into like a testimonial for Curated Connections, but you have this really unique setup amongst all our customers where you've created like multiple matching programs at the same time, and you've got them running for the community. Can you just tell us why that is important for the community?
Definitely. I'm gonna like continue repeating this, but the fact that we have so many different needs in the community is very much reflected in the way that we've set up Curated Connections. And so we've run kind of the like donut pairings, coffee chat things in the past where like random people are just connected and people love that. Some people don't, they don't have the time for that. But a lot of people do. And so like that's just one example of like some people just want to be introduced to just anyone in the community. And so we wanted to keep the random pairings as part of that. And like the more curated type introductions were also a major need in the community. And so being able to do that in a few different ways is really important because, like I shared earlier, there's like some folks want to connect on like different areas of healthcare. So I keep saying women's health because it's very top of mind for me. So women's health being one, like data interoperability being another, like fundraising for a startup. Like there's so many different topics to touch on. The other way people want to connect is like, I want to connect with another product person in healthcare. I want to connect with, someone in a similar position at a similar stage in their career to just kind of share learnings and help problem solve together. And that's very different than let's talk about this area in healthcare that maybe we're both working in, but like, let's talk functionally about our day to day in our roles and help one another solve our challenges. And I think like there's no perfect way about going about it. I think we spend a lot of time trying to curate the lists of the topics, and there's never going to be like a mutually exclusive, collectively exhaustive list of these things. But in trying to break them up a little bit, it's a more helpful way of getting there. And so I think it's, again, trying to address many different needs of folks without, again, like boxing people out from like, I think increasingly as you add more questions to curated connections, the sample size gets a lot smaller. And so instead of saying like, let's combine function and space, so let's say like people have to match on space. So let's say women's health and function. So let's say product. And so the chances of there being that many relevant people that are in product roles at women's health companies is rather small, even with a larger community. But being able to let people kind of have the option to say, no, I'm really just focused on learning more about the space that I'm working in, or no, I'm really focused on getting like leveling up in my role and helping other people learn what I've learned. And so I think it's just different use cases and figuring out how you can solve for those in a way that, again, like still brings in a really healthy number of people and engages them and they get value out of that while solving for all of these different needs. And so I would say that's exactly why.
Yeah.
And like a good example of that is we just launched, we're 5 now, like a knowledge exchange one, which is what folks continue to ask for, which is like, I want to meet people who are experts in value-based care or experts in, chronic conditions. And I want to help them learn about data science and analytics and health equity and access. And like, how can we pair those people? And like, how can you give them enough options such that like we have given someone at least one, maybe two options of the things that they know and that they want to learn about. And so I think there's a huge need again to like solve for all of these different needs. And so I think that's where like the feedback comes in. I think the ability to like analyze that feedback and have the information on your members to know what they're needing is huge. And a big part of that for us is when folks are joining our community, we have a pretty robust new member form, which part of that goes into our member directory. Part of that is just information for our team to understand like who's joining our community, what do they want to learn about, what are they experts on, and being able to really like kind of normalize and understand that data to inform like, let's host an event on this topic or let's spin up a program on this topic. So again, I think it's very much just like solving for lots of different use cases and ensuring that the pairings are still relevant. So it's like there's very much a sweet spot, I would say, in these things, because getting too granular decreases value, becoming too generic decreases value. So finding that like healthy sweet spot of like the introductions are really relevant, there's enough of them, and it keeps people around.
Yeah, I love this, and you bring a good point that I totally missed putting on the on our outline, which is about the onboarding of new members. Like, what's your process, or what's more important, what's the communication like when you're onboarding somebody new? Like you have so many things happening in the community, and you also have to hit a sweet spot where you're getting a new person excited about the possibilities in the community without overwhelming them. So what are what are the maybe like the 3 to 5 things or however many things that you tell somebody new?
Um, it's a good question. I think that we've learned a lot over time in doing this. I think again, as the community has grown and the volume of things has grown, the onboarding process becomes even more important. So currently we have when folks join the community, we have a welcome email that goes out that just kind of like does an overview of all the things available to them. And then when they join our Slack community, we have a Slack drip campaign that goes out. It is automated, but it does come from me. And so I'm in the loop of every single one of these messages. So that's, I don't know, hundreds of DMs going out every single month. And it kind of welcomes them and explains a couple of first steps that, are really impactful to take, which for us is posting an intro in the intros channel. It's a really good way for folks to gain traction, and folks will reach out to them and say, like, in a lot of cases, someone knows that person. They're like, oh my gosh, we used to work together, whatever, we should catch up. Or like, I'd really like to connect and also building in the space, whatever that might be. So we try to encourage just like a couple initial impactful first steps. And then over the couple of first weeks, we ask like, why did you join the community? And then we point them to like a relative set of resources that they can use and help them kind of go through that transition, and just staying in touch over the course of like the first 2 to 4 weeks to just get feedback and understand how they're like in the community. Also, if there's inactivity, we reach out and ask how we can help, things like that. And so I think just getting them really embedded to start is super important. I think one of the things that I'm personally working on is actually extending that onboarding. I think we look at onboarding a lot of like just when a member joins. The reality is that their needs change over time. And I think in particular for us, someone joins to find a job and they find a job and they're like, great, okay, I'm out, right? Which is like totally fair, because if you're paying, monthly or annually, might as well. But there's so many different ways to get value out of the community. I think we can do a better job of saying, like, connecting with that person, say in 3 to 6 months, whatever that average timeline of finding a job is, and say, hey, have you found a role? If the answer is no, we point them back towards job resources. If the answer is yes, we say, great, like this is a really great community to help get up to speed in your role really, really fast, or go meet other people who are now like in similar positions. And so I think it's like it's just a continuous process. And the one really surprising thing for me, at least in managing the community, is that it can feel like when you launch products or like you have updates, like you're just hitting them over the head with things and you're being super annoying. What's really been surprising to me is you have to just continue being like incessantly annoying about things, because people miss things. And like a really good example of this is when we launched Curated Connections, which was, we posted it in email, we posted in general Slack. Like it felt like it was everywhere and we were being super over the top about it. But it wasn't until I like pulled some data on like how our members engage and found like networking power users in the community, and then directly reached out to them to say, hey, we know that you're like, you enjoy networking in the community. We wanted to point you to this new product that we've launched. And it wasn't until we did that we had like 10x the number of people that enrolled. Like it was instantaneous, and people really appreciated the fact that we had reached out to them. And so
That's
I
so
don't know, I think it's,
good.
yeah, it's like
So
you
what
have to
really worked
be,
is the direct reach out.
yeah. And I would say that it's applicable across the board. Like we just launched the knowledge exchange program, which people have been begging us to build, and like 5 people have enrolled. And so like literally on my list today is to create a list of people that I, based on what I know about them and why they've joined and how they engage in the community, I'm going to reach out and say, by the way, like you should sign up for this program. And so it'll be interesting to see if that still holds true. But yeah, I think that has been like one of the biggest learnings for me, is like people need constant reminders. They all engage in very different ways. And so like putting something in email, putting that something on Slack, like doing the direct outreach, like you really need to do all of those things to really get in front of people, because like, especially now, like everyone is so inundated by just stuff. Like there's so much noise, like digitally, and being able to understand your members and what they want, and like having the ability to do that, I think is really, really important.
Mm-hmm. I love this. I mean, this goes to show, I feel, I'm repeating what I earlier said about how good of an understanding you have or a relation you have with your members and how important that is. Like the being able to just figure out that, email and posting in the community, like all of those things, the first things you should do, but then reaching out to members like specifically, that is gonna just
Mhm.
10x the success of I believe like any program, and yeah, I love this.
Yeah, I was shocked. I was like, we had a goal of when we wanted to, or like to the number that we wanted to get based on the existing networking products we've tried, and we were close. But I was like, I'm just gonna try it, and yeah, it was pretty
I
remarkable how quickly people did that and appreciated that.
love that. And yeah, just like to linger on the subject of curated connections a few more minutes, like what has been the feedback from your members about the program?
Yeah, members have really appreciated the switch. So we had used some other platforms for like the curated pairings as well as separately random pairings. And I think, over time, those have become a little bit less useful. And we wanted to just, try something different. And the reality is like we had one product that was perhaps like too complex for our needs, and then we had another that was maybe just too simple. And so I think the feedback that we've gotten so far is like matches feel more relevant, which I think is in part the platform, but in part how we thought about structuring the programs and the matching questions and like again hitting that sweet spot of relevancy. And yeah, I think it's just really interesting because you think that folks want everything like kind of handed to them on a silver platter and like done for them and all of this stuff. And I think as like I've managed our platform and tech stack over time, it's interesting to see how people like and don't like to engage. Like some things that seem easier and more intuitive and user friendly on the surface can actually be more complicated for a number of reasons. And I think it's just the idea that folks can kind of opt in once they feel like the matches are relevant to them. I would say there's enough friction. This isn't a negative on curated connections, but I think there's enough friction in the process such that like you don't get people opting in who might no show or like just not really respect the introduction, which does happen. I would say it's the biggest point of negative feedback that we get is like so and so didn't respond, they didn't show up to our meeting, and the reality is there's a number of reasons that could happen. But again, I think there's enough friction in the process that you get folks that need to take a couple of extra steps to actually get enrolled in it, but not so much so that they like don't have the time and don't do it. And so I think that has improved the rate of folks showing for things like this, and again, improve the relevancy of matching as well. So hopefully
Yeah.
that answers your question.
Yeah, it does. And thank you so much for sharing this. It's really, yeah, I'm really happy to hear like a community as strong as yours is, appreciating or enjoying the platform.
Mm-hmm.
So that's pretty
Definitely.
validating. Yeah, moving on, like what has worked for you to boost the growth of the membership? Because I know that you're managing that part also at Health Tech Nerds.
Mm-hmm.
So any learnings on the growth side of things?
Yeah, it's an interesting question because we historically have not done a lot of growth, like intentional growth activity. HTN has grown purely out of word of mouth, and so it's as well as our newsletter. And so we haven't done any like paid marketing or like marketing growth partnerships or anything like that. And so it's exclusively been word of mouth, which is really powerful. I would say over time that kind of runs out because folks' networks are like accelerating exponentially. And so now we're kind of shifting focus into like how do we continue to grow but grow with the right audience. Like we don't just want anybody joining the community, we want folks joining who are willing to like actually contribute to the community. It's never been like growth for growth's sake. It's really just been like if the right people get into the community and have a good experience, they're going to invite more good people to the community.
Yeah, what other tools are you in every day? Like you're in Slack, you already
Mhm.
mentioned that you're using Curated Connections, obviously. What else?
We are, let me think through our tech stack. Yeah, curated connections on networking front. Slack is a huge part. Like obviously our main like newsletter, like ESP provider and website provider, where kind of it's like the hub for folks to go and read existing content, log in, manage their subscription, what have you. And then we're big users of like Airtable and Zapier. Over the time of managing our platform, one of the things that I've really taken away from all of this is that we've kind of experimented with having like a very, how do I say, like having a lot of point solutions that are integrated with one another versus like trying to move to like a consolidated solution that does everything. And the reality is that when you're operating across so many different channels, like the solutions that are all in one haven't usually worked for us. Instead, like investing in like the best of breed in each of the different areas has been more effective for us. It's harder on the back end because you're having to like manually string things together, which is a huge challenge that we have been are working on from like a data perspective. But ultimately, like again, investing in best of breed like products in the tech stack and making sure that they at least have one, maybe two ways of stringing those together. And then being able to, or finding someone who can help you do that has been huge. So virtual events are over Zoom. We like the platform Luma for like our CPs for both in-person and digital. Their free version is actually really robust, and I think the user experience is really strong. So we love Luma. One of the things that maybe isn't necessarily product, but we're doing more of is like leveraging AI and automation to help kind of take product out and wisdom and value out of Slack and find other ways for folks to engage in it. And so we actually have a bot, like a GPT trained bot on all existing content and conversations that folks can use to surface existing insights, which was built internally.
Wow.
I didn't build it, but we have I'm happy to name drop him. Cody Krumman is
Cody's
our
amazing.
developer who built that. You know Cody.
Yeah.
And then we're working on building a job board that pulls the job posted in Slack and puts them in like a user-friendly job board format. And so that's another thing. And I think it's just a means of like a lot of the activity happens in Slack, and how do we leverage tools and tech and whatnot to be able to actually make it easier to engage with, because there's so much of it. Yeah. Oh, I don't know if I missed anything, but yeah, I think this
Yeah.
idea, yeah,
I love
it's
this.
been the platform tech stack stuff has been a huge learning experience for me. I think one of the really tricky things for us has been there's a lot of people building a lot, and like being able to really understand like how robust their product is, if what they're saying is actually true, like what's their support look like, how receptive are they to feedback. Like those are, when I'm evaluating various platforms, those are some of the key things. And um it's never been like a cost savings thing for us. Like we want to invest in the strong platforms for our members. It's always been about like, do they meet like our high priority, which is like, again, receptive to feedback. Like we're open to working with newer products, smaller teams, things like that, so long as they're willing to kind of work with us and be open to the feedback that we're sharing. Because like I've been told by nearly every product person on various platforms is that we tend to push products to their limits, which like is good because you could pressure test a product. And I think that as long as they're open to like resolving issues and making improvements to the product, we prefer to work with teams like that. And so that is a really big part of like my discovery and decision making when it comes to products.
Yeah. I can give a testament to that like firsthand. So
Yeah.
um,
The
yeah,
one thing I didn't mention, sorry, about Slack is that we use Waves to archive Slack conversations that are older than 90 days. So like since Slack has increased their prices rather considerably, it's become completely unsustainable for our business model. We didn't want to pass costs off to our customers. And so being able to still archive and have existing conversations accessible is huge. I mean, it's a major part of the value prop. It was a really hard and big decision for our business, and it was the only solution we could find in like anywhere. And the team at Waves has been like really supportive and very responsive. How I found you actually, and so I've really appreciated that as well.
Yeah, waves are amazing. Talking about Slack a little bit more, because that has been a frequent point of discussion and debate on this podcast. Why have you chosen to build your community on Slack as opposed to some of these other like community focused platforms like Circle? I'm sure that you have
Mhm.
considered that yourself. So what has been your reasoning for
Yeah.
that?
Yeah, it's again, we evaluated a lot of different platforms when we were just making the decision to move off of the premium Slack subscription. Ultimately, like Slack is such like a native platform that, and there's no other adoption like it. Most people are already in Slack. Um, we actually, when we were evaluating the move, dug up a lot of like existing like podcasts and stuff like that from Slack leadership and product leadership, where they specifically stated that they're not building Slack to be for community. Specifically stated that, which is interesting. I wish they would. It would be really great, but they're not, and that's a business decision, and I respect that. And so the reality is that like Slack is where people engage and want to be, and there's just nothing that even comes close to the level of just like adoption and native usage of the platform. They're just not. And trust me, I've dug very, very, very
Yeah.
deep to understand like what are some possible solutions to that. And it's just it doesn't exist. I don't see a future where like we're not on Slack, honestly. I think
Mm-hmm.
one of the things that I'm trying to work on is restructuring the way that we have our Slack organized. Again, it's just grown exponentially over time and it's slowed down a little bit, which is honestly kind of good because it gives us this opportunity to say, okay, like how, like what things aren't working that used to serve us and how can we build and organize within the limitations of Slack. So that's something we're thinking about too, because we've gotten to this number where you start to get natural sub communities and like we're I don't think quite big enough where like the general news channels and builders ask channels can be broken up meaningfully, but I think we're getting there. And so just something that we're thinking about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah, no. I think this is exactly why all of the other guests who are building on Slack, they've told me about the reason of for choosing Slack because it has so many problems, and as you mentioned, like the Slack team is definitely not building it for communities, but all of those
No.
problems are nothing compared to the frictionless experience that you're able to deliver to your members when you have your community on Slack,
Yeah.
and that is something that I hear again and again on this podcast. So great to hear that
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah. It's really great. But yeah, a lot of people again, like the blessing and the curse, we have a ton of engagement and activity every single day, but like it's overwhelming to some people and they're like, I don't have time. And so I'm gonna stop paying for members as a result. And so it's again something we just have to solve for and
Yeah,
we're trying to work on constantly. So
yeah, yeah. No, I love that. And moving to some of the more community building side of the
mhm.
discussion, what is the hard or maybe the hardest part of managing a community like this?
I think at least for me personally, I really care a lot about like people's feedback. And I think the negative feedback is easier to take to heart than the positive feedback. And so, like I shared earlier, having channels to share both with the team is really important. I think when you're so close to the product and the customers, it's like can be really disheartening to hear people like upset with the platform, especially like people who've been longtime customers. I manage all the new members coming in. I manage all the canceled members coming in. I manage our administrative inbox when people reach out and say, "Hey, I want a refund." Like, and again, like no harm, no foul, but like it is hard. It's really hard because like it's something we care so much about and are doing everything in our power to like make really positive and valuable for people. And so hearing some of those things or seeing them is like again can be really disheartening. So you just have to like hold on to the wins and like like just hold on to them and not get too discouraged by people joining out of the community, which does happen, and do everything you can to continue adding value and improving product and things like that. I think as long as you know that you're building in the right direction, investing in the right things and whatnot, I think it's really positive. It's very rewarding like company to be a part of and help grow. So yeah.
Yeah.
That's that's the biggest challenge for me. I think that is more of a personal response.
If let's say I'm somebody who has a newsletter and I've got like a few thousand subscribers there, I'm considering like starting a community for them. Like,
Mhm.
what should be the thing that I should be spending, say, most of my nights thinking about that would, you know, make the community a success? Or like, what should be the one thing that I need to just maniacally focus on, in your opinion?
Hmm. I think it's like, what is the problem you're trying to solve for? Like for us, like the community was sort of born out of this idea that healthcare is very fragmented. And like if you're building in health tech, you're typically really separated from the clinical perspective. If you're working in a health system, you're probably really separated from the startup ecosystem. And the reality is that it's like just a very disconnected industry. And so part of what we were trying to solve for was to create a space for to improve that. And I think just keeping like your North Star front and center, because it's really easy to get distracted by, like, again, feedback that's coming in and people wanting various things. And I think as long as you remember like what you're trying to solve, I don't think it's enough to say like we just want a space for people to connect to that radar newsletter. I just don't. I think like thinking about like why you write your newsletter, why do people subscribe to that, and like how could they benefit from being like in a space where they can directly connect with people. I think understanding exactly what that problem is you're trying to solve is really important, because I think just doing one thing really well is really important. And then as you continue to grow, just staying really close to feedback and customer and whatnot. But I think community management is very humbling. It's really difficult. And so being clear about why you're doing it and making that clear to the people in the community is important. I think that'd be my advice.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's amazing advice. I think that is the crux of what it means to be building a community. You captured it really well. Thank you. And then we come to the final question for the interview. So I want to discuss your watering holes a little bit. So who are the people that you follow? Where do you hang out with communities? And what do you read, especially as it relates to community management and the the work that you're doing every day.
I pay for one subscription, it's for Lenny's community. I like for a number of reasons. One being his content, podcast, paid free content is really strong. Two, I think his community is very much like what good looks like. And we've modeled a lot of what we've done off of Lenny's community because they figured out what really works really well. I would encourage a lot of people who are looking to build community to join Lenny's community and see how they structure things, how they like operate, things like that. I think from like a community management perspective, like any specific community management content has largely been, I think is it Daniel Spink? Am I putting
David
what's
Spinks, yeah.
David Spinks? Yes, Daniel. Okay. I really like his community management content. I think that's been really useful because I don't have a community management background. And so it's helpful to hear that kind of stuff. And then I had only recently started following your content and like podcast stuff. And I think the one you had shared recently that we're actively thinking about is like lifetime membership pricing. And I thought it was really tactical and saying like these are the couple of steps to take to figure out how you price it, whether it's good fit, things like that. So I appreciated that, and I think it's helpful because it's generally like a pretty targeted topic instead of saying like here are the best 10 best community management tips, but like truly like this is how you go about this one thing. And so I've appreciated that.
I love hearing that. And this is really humbling to be, told alongside Lenny and David Spinks for a while. And that is really, really cool to hear. And thank you so much for being here and sharing all of that information with us.
Definitely. Thanks for having me.
Of course, and where should listeners go to connect with you? We'll link to your LinkedIn in the show notes. Is there anywhere else that you want listeners to go?
Me personally? Yeah, I mean they can connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm not super active. Community management is no joke. I have so much respect for people who do it and are way better than me at it. So yeah.
I think you're killing it. Thank you so much for joining. And yeah, it's been a pleasure chatting with you here, Abby.
Likewise, in touch. Thank you.
Let me stop the